Alright, let's talk about one of the most mysterious figures in the history of philosophy. Look at this title, The Ancient Sage of the Tao. Now I want you to imagine something. It's the 6th century BCE. China is in turmoil. The Zhou dynasty is falling apart, society is fragmenting, violence is everywhere. And there's this old man, an archivist, who's spent his entire life in the imperial library, cataloging wisdom, studying the classics, watching the world descend into chaos. One day, he's had enough. He climbs onto a water buffalo, yes, a water buffalo, and he starts riding west, heading for the wilderness. He's done with civilization, he's leaving. But here's where it gets good. At the western gate of China, a border guard recognizes him and says, "Wait, you can't leave without sharing what you know." So this elderly sage sits down and writes 5,000 Chinese characters. Just 5,000. That's it. Then he hands it over, climbs back on his buffalo, and rides off into the sunset, never to be seen again. Those 5,000 characters became the Tao Te Ching, one of the most translated books in human history, second only to the Bible in terms of translations. Think about that for a moment. This isn't just some ancient curiosity we're studying. This is a text that has shaped Eastern philosophy for 2,500 years. It's influenced Buddhism, Zen, traditional Chinese medicine, martial arts, poetry, painting, and now modern wellness movements and leadership theory. And can we just appreciate the cosmic irony here? The guy who wrote one of the most influential books in history was literally trying to escape humanity. He was going off the grid. "I'm done with all of you people." That's gotta be the ultimate backfire, right? "I'm leaving civilization forever to live in peace," gets quoted by world leaders and CEOs for the next 2,500 years. But here's why this matters to you, right now, today. Lao-zi asks questions we're all wrestling with in our modern world. What if you're trying too hard? What if the secret to real power isn't force but flexibility? What if success doesn't come from pushing harder but from flowing better? In our hyper-connected, always-on, optimization-obsessed culture, Lao-zi offers something radical. What if doing less could accomplish more? That's not laziness. That's wisdom. And we're going to explore exactly what he means. Okay, so who actually was this guy? And here's where I need to be intellectually honest with you. We don't really know. Look at what the slide tells us. Traditionally dated to the 6th century BCE. Notice that word? Traditionally, that's historian speak for, this is what people have believed for a long time, but we're not entirely sure. The historical evidence for Lao-zi's existence is, let's call it thin. Some scholars think he might have been a real person. Others think Lao-zi might be a composite figure, multiple thinkers whose ideas got attributed to one legendary sage. Still others think the Tao Te Ching was written much later than the 6th century BCE. So basically, we're studying the philosophy of someone who might not have existed, who might have been several people, who might have lived at a different time than we think. Welcome to ancient philosophy, where half the fun is arguing about whether your subject was even real. But you know what? In a weird way, that's very Taoist. The philosophy itself teaches that names and categories are artificial. So maybe it's fitting that we can't pin down exactly who Lao-zi was. Here's what the tradition tells us, and even if it's not literally true, it's philosophically significant. As you can see here, Lao-zi served as an archivist at the Zhou court. Think about what that means. An archivist isn't just a librarian. He had access to all the accumulated wisdom of Chinese civilization up to that point. He studied the classics, the histories, the philosophical texts. He wasn't some random hermit with opinions. He was deeply learned. The slide mentions he was a contemporary of Confucius. Now, whether they actually met is debatable, but there's a famous story about their encounter. Confucius, who was already a renowned teacher, supposedly came to consult with Lao-zi. After the meeting, Confucius told his disciples that meeting Lao-zi was like encountering a dragon. Not a cute, friendly dragon. A dragon, something powerful, mysterious, beyond ordinary comprehension. And then we get to that moment I mentioned, the departure. Look at this. Legend tells of his final journey. Disillusioned with society, he departed China riding a water buffalo, disappearing into the western wilderness, never to be seen again. Picture this scene. An old man, having spent his life studying wisdom, watching his society tear itself apart. Confucius was trying to fix society through education, ritual, proper conduct. Lao-zi looked at the same chaos and said, "You know what? I'm out." He didn't write manifestos. He didn't start a school. He didn't try to reform the government. He just left. But that border guard stopped him. "You can't take all that wisdom with you. Leave us something." So Lao-zi wrote the Tao Te Ching, the classic of the way and its power. And then he was gone. Now here's what's philosophically important about this uncertainty. Whether Lao-zi was one person or many, whether this story is literal history or symbolic legend, the ideas attributed to him are real and powerful. Those ideas shaped Taoism, one of the three great philosophical traditions of China alongside Confucianism and Buddhism. They influenced Chinese culture so deeply that you can't understand Chinese art, poetry, medicine, or martial arts without understanding Taoist concepts. And those ideas spread. They merged with Buddhism to create Chan Buddhism in China, which became Zen in Japan. They influenced Korean and Vietnamese philosophy. And in the modern era, they've influenced Western thinkers, leaders, and spiritual seekers. So we may not know exactly who Lao-zi was, but we know what he taught. And what he taught was revolutionary. He proposed that the fundamental nature of reality, the Tao, the way, is something that can't be captured in words or concepts. That true power comes from softness, not hardness. That the best action is often no action at all. These ideas sound paradoxical. They are paradoxical. And that's exactly the point. So let's dive into the heart of his philosophy. Let's talk about the Tao itself. All right, here we go. This is it. The big one. The concept that gives Taoism its name. Look at this slide. The Tao, the way of nature. 3 key points here. The eternal way, beyond words, and living in harmony. And then at the bottom, we get the most famous line from the entire Tao Te Ching. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. Now here's what's wild about this. Lao-zi opens his entire philosophical text by essentially saying, "I can't actually tell you what I'm about to tell you." It's like starting a lecture with, "Everything I'm about to say is wrong." It's philosophically audacious. But let's slow down and think carefully about what he means. The word Tao literally translates as way or path. But Lao-zi isn't talking about a physical road. He's talking about the fundamental principle underlying all of existence, the natural order of the universe. The way things actually work when you strip away all our human concepts, categories, and interference. Look at the first point on the slide. Tao means the way, the natural order and fundamental principle underlying all existence in the universe. Think of it this way. Before humans invented language, before we created categories like good and bad, beautiful and ugly, success and failure, the universe was already operating according to certain principles. Rivers flowed downhill. Seasons changed. Life emerged, flourished, and returned to the earth. That underlying pattern, that fundamental how things work, that's the Tao. But here's where Lao-zi gets tricky. He says the Tao is ineffable. It can't be captured in words, which creates an immediate problem, right? Because he just named it. He called it Tao. It's like saying, the thing I'm about to name cannot be named. I'll call it Steve. What Lao-zi is getting at is this. The word Tao is just a placeholder, a finger pointing at the moon. Don't confuse the finger for the moon itself. The word isn't the thing. The map isn't the territory. Look at the second point. The Tao is ineffable and mysterious, impossible to fully grasp through language or intellect alone. This is profound, and it's worth sitting with for a moment. Lao-zi is making an epistemological claim here, a claim about the limits of knowledge. He's saying that rational analysis and linguistic description can only take you so far. There are aspects of reality that can only be experienced, not explained. Think about trying to describe the color red to someone who's been blind from birth, or trying to explain what music sounds like to someone who's never heard, or trying to capture the taste of chocolate in words. You can try. It's sweet but also slightly bitter, with a rich, creamy texture. But you're not actually conveying the experience of chocolate. Lao-zi says the Tao is like that, but infinitely more so. It's the ground of all being, the source of all existence. How could mere words capture that? But, and this is crucial, Lao-zi isn't being mystical for mysticism's sake. He's not just playing word games. There's a practical point here. Look at the third element, living in harmony. True peace and balance come from aligning ourselves with the natural flow of the Tao. Here's what he's getting at. If the Tao is the natural way things work, then wisdom means aligning yourself with that natural flow rather than fighting against it. Think about swimming. You can thrash against a current, exhausting yourself and getting nowhere. Or you can understand the current, work with it, and let it carry you where you need to go. That's the difference between living against the Tao and living with it. Now let's come back to that famous opening line. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. What Lao-zi means is this. The moment you try to define the Tao, you've limited it. You've put boundaries around something that has no boundaries. You've made it static when it's actually dynamic. You've turned a living reality into a dead concept. It's like trying to capture running water in your hands. The moment you close your fist, it's not running water anymore. It's just a few drops trapped in your palm. So when Lao-zi talks about the Tao throughout the Tao Te Ching, he's not giving you a definition. He's giving you metaphors, images, suggestions. He's pointing you toward an experience, not handing you a formula. And here's why this matters in our modern world. We live in an age obsessed with definitions, categories, and control. We want to measure everything, optimize everything, pin everything down. We create systems and structures and rules for how things should work. Lao-zi is saying, but what if reality doesn't work according to your systems? What if there's a natural order that's wiser than your plans? What if the secret isn't to impose your will on the world, but to understand the world's natural patterns and work with them? That's not passivity. That's a different kind of power. And we're about to explore exactly what that looks like. Okay, this is where Lao-zi's philosophy gets really practical and really misunderstood. Look at this slide. Wu Wei, effortless action. The slide tells us it's often misunderstood as non-doing, but more accurately understood as effortless action or doing without forcing. This is crucial, because when people first hear about Wu Wei, they often think Lao-zi is advocating for laziness. Just sit back, do nothing, let life happen to you. That is not what he means. Wu Wei isn't about doing nothing. It's about doing without forcing. It's about action that flows naturally rather than action that fights against reality. Let me break down the term itself. Wu means without or not. Wei means action or doing. So literally, Wu Wei means without action or non-doing. But here's where translation gets tricky. In Chinese philosophical context, Wei specifically means forced action, artificial action, action that goes against the natural flow. So Wu Wei really means without forced action, or without artificiality. It's the difference between forcing a door open versus finding the right key, damming a river versus channeling its natural flow. Micromanaging every detail versus creating conditions for success. Wu Wei is about working with reality rather than against it. Look at these three beautiful examples on the slide. Each one illuminates a different aspect of Wu Wei. First, natural cultivation, like watering a plant with just the right amount, neither too much nor too little. We nurture growth without forcing it. Picture this, you've got a plant. You can't make it grow. You can't pull on the leaves to make it taller. You can't yell at it to bloom faster. All you can do is provide the right conditions, water, sunlight, good soil, and then let nature do its work. That's Wu Wei. You're acting, yes. You're watering the plant. But you're not forcing an outcome. You're creating conditions and allowing natural processes to unfold. Second, flowing movement. Like riding a bicycle with perfect balance, we move through life with grace rather than struggle and resistance. Okay. Think about learning to ride a bike. When you first start, what happens? You're tense, you're gripping the handlebars too tight, you're overthinking every movement. And what happens? You wobble, you fall, you crash. But then something clicks. You relax. You stop trying so hard. And suddenly you're gliding, balanced, flowing. You're doing more by trying less. That moment when bike riding becomes effortless, that's Wu Wei. And here's the funny thing. You can't force that moment to happen. You can't think your way into perfect balance. You have to let go and let it happen naturally. Third, adapting naturally. Like water finding its way around obstacles, we respond to circumstances with flexibility and spontaneity. This is Lao-zi's favorite metaphor, and we're going to see it again. Water is the ultimate example of Wu Wei. Think about water flowing downhill. Does it plan its route? Does it strategize? Does it force its way through obstacles? No. It simply flows. When it encounters a rock, it flows around it. When it finds a crack, it flows through it. When it reaches a cliff, it becomes a waterfall. Water is soft, yielding, seemingly weak. But over time, water carves canyons through solid rock. Not through force, but through persistence and flexibility. Here's what's revolutionary about Wu Wei. It suggests that the most effective action often feels effortless. Think about the best athletes. When they're in the zone, what does it look like? It looks easy, effortless, like they're not even trying, but they're performing at their absolute peak. Or think about a great conversation. When it's flowing naturally, nobody's forcing it. Ideas emerge spontaneously. Insights arise organically. It feels effortless, but profound things are happening. That's Wu Wei. Maximum effectiveness with minimum forcing. Now this is radically different from how we typically think in Western culture. We're taught, work harder, push through, force the outcome. No pain, no gain. Hustle and grind. Lao-zi says, what if you're exhausting yourself fighting against reality? What if there's a natural current you could ride instead of swimming against? This isn't about being passive or lazy, it's about being smart. It's about understanding the situation deeply enough to know where to apply effort and where to let things unfold naturally. Think about modern examples. You're trying to remember someone's name. The harder you try, the more it escapes you. But the moment you stop trying and think about something else, pop. There it is. You're trying to fall asleep. The more you try to force it, the more awake you become. But when you stop trying and just relax, sleep comes naturally. You're trying to be creative, staring at a blank page, forcing ideas. Nothing comes. But when you take a walk, stop trying, let your mind wander, suddenly, inspiration strikes. That's Wu Wei in action. But here's the challenge. Wu Wei requires deep understanding. You can't just go with the flow randomly. You need to understand what the natural flow is. You need wisdom to know when to act and when to wait, when to push and when to yield, when to speak and when to be silent. It's like that water metaphor. Water doesn't flow randomly. It flows according to gravity, according to the landscape, according to natural laws. Wu Wei means understanding those natural laws and working with them. And this brings us back to the Tao. Remember, the Tao is the natural order of things. Wu Wei is about aligning your actions with that natural order. When you're living in Wu Wei, you're living in harmony with the Tao. You're not imposing your will on reality. You're understanding reality deeply enough to work with it rather than against it. This is why Lao-zi says the sage acts without acting. Not because the sage does nothing, but because the sage's actions are so aligned with the natural flow that they don't feel forced. They feel inevitable, natural, effortless. Now you might be thinking, okay, this sounds nice in theory, but how does this actually work? How can softness and flexibility be more powerful than force and strength? That's exactly what we're going to explore next. Because Lao-zi has a radical claim to make about the nature of power itself. Alright, now we get to one of the most radical ideas in all of philosophy. Look at this slide. Softness overcoming hardness. And at the bottom, we have this incredible quote from Lao-zi. Nothing in the world is softer than water, yet nothing is better at overcoming the hard and strong. Think about what he's claiming here. He's saying that everything we think we know about power is backwards. We think power comes from being hard, rigid, forceful, unyielding. Lao-zi says, you're wrong. Real power comes from being soft, flexible, and yielding. This isn't just poetic language, this is a fundamental claim about how reality works. And if he's right, it changes everything about how we should live. Let's really sit with this water metaphor because it's doing serious philosophical work here. As the slide says, water serves as his central metaphor, soft, yielding, and seemingly weak, yet capable of eroding the mightiest mountains over time. Think about the Grand Canyon, one of the most spectacular geological formations on Earth. How was it created? By the Colorado River. Water. Soft, flowing water, cutting through solid rock for millions of years. The rock is hard. The rock is strong. The rock seems permanent. But the water? The water is soft, formless, constantly changing. And yet the water wins. Every single time. Now here's what's philosophically important. The water doesn't win through force. It doesn't smash against the rock like a battering ram. It wins through persistence, flexibility, and time. It flows around obstacles, it seeps into cracks, it adapts to every contour of the landscape. Now you might be thinking, okay, but that takes millions of years. I don't have millions of years to wait for results. Fair point. And Lao-zi isn't saying you should just sit around being soft and hope things work out in a few million years. But think about this. How many times have you seen someone try to force a situation, push too hard, be too rigid, and it backfires spectacularly? The boss who rules through fear and intimidation. Eventually people quit or rebel. The parent who tries to control every aspect of their child's life. The kid either breaks or runs away the moment they can. The person who's so rigid in their opinions they can't adapt to new information. They get left behind while the world changes around them. Hardness looks powerful in the short term, but it's brittle. It breaks. Look at what the slide tells us. This philosophy reveals that true strength doesn't come from force or rigidity. Instead, humility, flexibility, and gentleness lead to lasting success and genuine power. This is revolutionary, especially in Lao-zi's time, an era of warfare, rigid hierarchies, and brutal competition for power. Lao-zi is saying, all that force, all that aggression, all that rigid control, it's actually weakness disguised as strength. Real strength is the bamboo that bends in the wind instead of breaking. Real strength is the water that flows around the rock instead of shattering against it. Real strength is the person who can adapt, who can yield when necessary, who doesn't need to prove their power through domination. Now let's think carefully about what this means philosophically. The slide mentions humility, flexibility, and gentleness. These aren't just nice personality traits, they're strategic advantages. Humility means you're open to learning, to changing, to admitting when you're wrong. That makes you adaptable. Flexibility means you can respond to changing circumstances, rather than rigidly sticking to a plan that no longer works. Gentleness means you don't create unnecessary resistance. You don't make enemies when you don't need to. You conserve your energy for what matters. Think about it in terms of conflict. If you meet force with force, what happens? Escalation. Both sides get harder, more rigid, more entrenched. It becomes a war of attrition. But if you meet force with flexibility, you can redirect it, absorb it, let it exhaust itself against your yielding. This is the principle behind martial arts like Tai Chi and Aikido. Use your opponent's force against them. Don't meet strength with strength. Meet it with softness that redirects. Here's the beautiful paradox. What appears weak may possess the greatest resilience. A tree that's too rigid, a strong wind snaps it. But grass bends flat to the ground and springs back up when the wind passes. A leader who's too rigid in their authority, a crisis breaks them. But a leader who's flexible, who can adapt, who doesn't need to dominate every situation, they navigate the crisis and emerge stronger. This is what Lao-zi means when he talks about the power of softness. It's not weakness. It's a different kind of strength, one that endures precisely because it doesn't resist. But notice what else the slide says. Lao-zi urges us towards simplicity, teaching that what appears weak may possess the greatest resilience. There's a warning embedded here. Don't be fooled by appearances. Don't mistake hardness for strength or softness for weakness. The loudest voice in the room isn't necessarily the most powerful. The person who yields in an argument isn't necessarily losing. The gentle approach isn't necessarily the ineffective one. In fact, often the opposite is true. The person who can afford to be gentle is the one who's truly secure. The person who can afford to yield is the one who's truly confident. The person who can afford to be flexible is the one who's truly strong. Think about modern technology. What's more powerful, a rigid, inflexible system or an adaptive one? A company that says this is how we've always done it versus a company that can pivot and adapt? Which one survives? A relationship where both people are rigid and unyielding versus one where both people can compromise and adapt? Which one lasts? Even your phone. The old Nokia brick phones were hard and rigid. Drop them, they'd be fine. But they couldn't adapt. They couldn't become smartphones. The iPhone, fragile glass screen, breaks if you look at it wrong. But infinitely adaptable. Which one won? Okay, maybe that's not a perfect analogy, but you get the point. So we've seen that softness overcomes hardness, that flexibility beats rigidity, that yielding can be more powerful than forcing. But Lao-zi doesn't stop there, because this principle of softness and flexibility connects to something even deeper, his entire philosophy of balance and moderation. Now we're getting to the practical ethics of Lao-zi's philosophy. Look at this slide. The philosophy of balance and simplicity. 3 key principles here: avoiding extremes, contentment and moderation, and embracing humility. And notice how they all connect to what we've been discussing. Let's start with the first one. Avoiding extremes. The slide tells us, Lao-zi warns that going too far is as bad as not going far enough. The middle path prevents imbalance and maintains harmony in all aspects of life. This is profound. Lao-zi is saying that virtue isn't about maximizing some quality, it's about finding the right balance. Think about this in concrete terms. Confidence is good, right? But too much confidence becomes arrogance. Too little becomes crippling self-doubt. The virtue is in the balance. Caution is good, but too much caution becomes paralysis. Too little becomes recklessness. Again, balance. Even good things become bad when taken to extremes. You can work too hard. You can be too generous, to the point where people take advantage of you. You can even be too humble, to the point where you can't advocate for yourself. Lao-zi's point is this: the middle path isn't boring or mediocre. It's wise. Now, this idea of avoiding extremes might sound familiar if you've studied other philosophical traditions. The Buddha taught the middle way. Aristotle talked about the golden mean. But Lao-zi's version has a specific character. He's not just saying moderation in all things. He's saying that extremes create their own opposition. They generate imbalance, which then creates a backlash. Think about it politically. When a government becomes too authoritarian, what happens? Revolution. When it becomes too permissive, what happens? Chaos, which often leads to calls for authoritarian control. The pendulum swings. Extremes don't last because they create the conditions for their own reversal. And here's the ironic thing about extremes. They usually defeat themselves. The person who's obsessed with health to an extreme, they make themselves miserable and stressed, which is unhealthy. The person who works 100-hour weeks to get rich, they destroy their health and relationships, which makes the wealth meaningless. The person who's so focused on avoiding all risk that they never do anything, they miss out on life entirely. It's like that old joke, everything in moderation, including moderation. Sometimes you need to break the rules, but if you're always breaking the rules, you're just following a different set of rules, the rule of always breaking rules. Look at the second principle, contentment and moderation. By cultivating contentment and practicing moderation, we protect ourselves from unnecessary harm, suffering, and the endless cycle of desire. This is where Lao-zi gets really practical. He's diagnosing a fundamental human problem. We're never satisfied. We always want more. You get the promotion, now you want the next one. You buy the house, now you want a bigger one. You achieve the goal, now you need a new goal. This is an ambition. This is what Lao-zi would call the endless cycle of desire. And it makes you miserable because you're never content with what you have. You're always chasing the next thing. Here's Lao-zi's radical claim. Contentment is a form of wealth. Not contentment as in settling or giving up on your dreams. Contentment as in appreciating what you have while you work toward what you want. Contentment as in knowing when enough is enough. The slide says this protects us from unnecessary harm, suffering, and the endless cycle of desire. Think about what that means. How much suffering in your life comes from wanting things you don't have? How much anxiety comes from comparing yourself to others? How much stress comes from trying to keep up, get ahead, have more? Lao-zi isn't saying don't have goals. He's saying don't let the pursuit of goals destroy your ability to appreciate the present moment. Don't let desire become a tyrant that rules your life. And this brings us to the third principle, embracing humility. Look at what it says. Emphasis on humility, reducing material desires, and living simply creates space for genuine fulfillment and inner peace to flourish. In our modern world, this is almost countercultural. We're told to want more, buy more, achieve more, Be more. Bigger house? Better car? More impressive job title? More followers on social media? Lao-zi says, what if you just didn't? What if you reduced your material desires? What if you lived more simply, not out of poverty, but out of choice? Not because you can't have more, but because you don't need more. Here's what's philosophically interesting about this. Create space for genuine fulfillment and inner peace to flourish. Notice the metaphor. Space. When you're constantly chasing more, acquiring more, doing more, there's no space. Your life is cluttered. Your mind is cluttered. You're always busy, but never present. Simplicity creates space. Space to think, space to feel, space to connect with others, space to actually enjoy what you have. Think about it. When you have fewer possessions, you appreciate each one more. When you have fewer commitments, you can be fully present for the ones you have. When you have fewer desires, you can actually satisfy the ones that matter. Now, I have to point out the irony here. In modern Western culture, we've turned simplicity into another thing to achieve. People buy books about minimalism. They watch YouTube videos about decluttering. They buy expensive minimalist furniture. They compete to see who can own the fewest things. I only own 47 items. Oh yeah? Well, I only own 32. Amateurs? I'm down to 18 items and a cactus. That's not what Lao-zi means. You've just replaced the desire for more stuff with the desire for less stuff. You're still trapped in desire. The real point is this. Humility and simplicity aren't about deprivation. They're about freedom. When you're humble, you don't need to constantly prove yourself. You don't need to be the smartest person in the room, the most successful, the most impressive. You can just be. When you live simply, you're not enslaved to your possessions. You're not working yourself to death to pay for things you don't need. You're not stressed about maintaining, upgrading, protecting all your stuff. You're free. Free to focus on what actually matters. Free to pursue genuine fulfillment rather than superficial status. Free to find inner peace instead of external validation. Now, notice how all three of these principles connect. Avoiding extremes means you don't swing wildly between asceticism and indulgence. You find balance. Contentment and moderation means you appreciate what you have without constantly craving more. Humility and simplicity means you don't need external validation or material excess to feel worthy. Together, they create a way of life that's sustainable, peaceful, and genuinely fulfilling. Not exciting in a flashy way, perhaps, but deeply satisfying in a way that lasts. But here's the challenge. This is hard. Really hard. Our entire culture pushes against these principles. Advertising tells you you're not enough unless you buy this product. Social media tells you you're not successful unless you're constantly achieving and posting about it. The economy depends on you always wanting more. Living according to Lao-zi's principles means swimming against that current. It means being countercultural. It means having the courage to say enough when everyone around you is saying more. But if you can do it, if you can find that balance, cultivate that contentment, embrace that simplicity, Lao-zi promises something remarkable: genuine fulfillment and inner peace. Not the fleeting happiness that comes from getting what you want, the deep, lasting peace that comes from not needing to want in the first place. So we've seen Lao-zi's vision: live in harmony with the Tao, practice Wu Wei, embrace softness over hardness, seek balance and simplicity. But here's an interesting question. How did this philosophy interact with other great Chinese thinkers, particularly with someone who had a very different vision of how to create a good society? I'm talking about Confucius. And the contrast between these two giants of Chinese philosophy is absolutely fascinating. Alright, now we get to one of the most fascinating contrasts in the history of philosophy. Look at this slide. Lao-zi and Confucius, contrasting visions. 2 columns. 2 completely different approaches to the same fundamental question. How should human beings live? How do we create a good society? And here's what makes this so compelling. These weren't just abstract philosophical positions. These were 2 different visions for how to respond to the chaos and violence of their time. Ancient China was falling apart. The Zhou dynasty was collapsing. Warfare was constant. Society was fragmenting. Both Lao-zi and Confucius looked at this mess and said, "We need to fix this." But their solutions? Completely opposite. Let's start with Confucius. Look at the left column. Confucius believed the problem was that people had forgotten their proper roles. Society is like a family, he said. There are natural hierarchies, ruler and subject, father and son, husband and wife, older and younger, friend and friend. When everyone knows their place and fulfills their role properly, you get harmony. Importance of ritual, ceremony, and proper conduct. For Confucius, civilization is built on lie. Ritual propriety, how you greet someone, how you conduct a funeral, how you show respect to your elders. These aren't just empty formalities. They're the glue that holds society together. They teach us how to be human. Active engagement in society and governance. Confucius didn't withdraw from the world. He engaged with it. He traveled from state to state trying to convince rulers to adopt his principles. He taught students who would become government officials. He believed the solution was better education, better leaders, better governance. Education and moral cultivation through tradition. And how do you become a better person? Study the classics. Learn from the ancient sages. Cultivate virtue through education and practice. The past contains wisdom. We should learn from it, preserve it, transmit it. Now look at the right column, Lao-zi's approach. Focus on individual harmony with nature. Lao-zi wasn't interested in fixing society through better social structures. He thought the problem was social structures. They're artificial. They separate us from our natural state. True harmony comes from aligning yourself with the Tao, not with social conventions. Spontaneity and naturalness over rigid structure. Where Confucius emphasized ritual and proper conduct, Lao-zi emphasized spontaneity. Be natural. Be yourself. Don't force yourself into artificial roles and behaviors. The more rules you have, the more you need rules. It's a vicious cycle. Withdrawal from artificial social conventions. Remember how we started? Lao-zi literally left civilization. He rode off on a water buffalo. That's not just a biographical detail. It's a philosophical statement. The best response to a corrupt society isn't to reform it. It's to withdraw from it. Wisdom through simplicity and inner reflection. And how do you become wise? Not through studying the classics or learning rituals. Through simplicity, through inner reflection, through getting quiet enough to hear the Tao, through unlearning all the artificial nonsense society has taught you. So here's the fundamental disagreement. Confucius says, the problem is that we've abandoned civilization. We need more structure, more education, more cultivation of virtue through tradition. Lao-zi says, the problem is civilization. All that structure, all that artificiality, all those rules, they're separating us from our natural state. We need less, not more. It's like diagnosing an illness with completely opposite prescriptions. Confucius says the patient needs medicine. Lao-zi says the medicine is making the patient sick. Think about it this way. Imagine you're at a really awkward formal dinner party. Everyone's uncomfortable. The conversation is stilted. Nobody's having fun. Confucius's solution, we need better etiquette. Everyone needs to learn the proper way to hold their fork, the right topics of conversation, the correct way to address the host. If everyone just followed the rules properly, it would be a lovely evening. Lao-zi's solution, why are we even having this formal dinner party? Let's just order pizza, sit on the floor, and talk about whatever we want. All these rules are why everyone's uncomfortable. Both are trying to solve the same problem, the awkward dinner party, but their solutions are diametrically opposed. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Look at what the slide says at the bottom. Despite their differences, both philosophers respected each other deeply. Lao-zi was revered as a sage of natural wisdom, whilst Confucius championed the wisdom of cultural refinement. There's a famous story, probably legendary but philosophically revealing, about Confucius visiting Lao-zi to ask him questions about ritual and propriety. According to the story, after the meeting, Confucius came back to his disciples completely shaken. He said something like, I know how birds fly, how fish swim, how animals run. But today I met a dragon. I have no idea how a dragon moves through the clouds and rides the wind. Lao-zi is like a dragon. Think about what that means. Confucius, who was already famous, who had hundreds of disciples, who was confident in his teachings, met Lao-zi and was left speechless. What's philosophically significant here is that despite their fundamental disagreements, there was mutual respect. Confucius recognized that Lao-zi had accessed something profound, a wisdom that couldn't be captured in rituals and social structures, something mysterious, natural, beyond conventional understanding. And presumably, Lao-zi recognized that Confucius was genuinely trying to reduce suffering and create harmony, even if his method was different. They didn't need to agree. They could respect each other's sincerity and depth while maintaining their different visions. Look at the last line. Together, they represent complementary approaches to the eternal question of how to live well. This is crucial. These aren't just two random philosophies that happen to coexist. They're complementary. They address different aspects of human life. Confucius addresses the social dimension. How do we live together? How do we create stable, harmonious communities? How do we transmit wisdom across generations? Lao-zi addresses the natural dimension. How do we stay connected to our authentic selves? How do we avoid being crushed by social expectations? How do we find inner peace? You could argue we need both. Too much Confucianism and you get rigid, oppressive social structures where individuals are crushed by duty and obligation. Too much Taoism and you get social fragmentation, no shared values, everyone just doing their own thing. And in fact, Chinese culture has been shaped by both. Not one or the other, but the dynamic tension between them. In public life, in government, in family relationships, Confucian values dominated hierarchy, duty, ritual, education. But in private life, in art, in poetry, in personal spirituality, Taoist values flourished. Spontaneity, naturalness, harmony with nature, inner cultivation. A Chinese scholar might be a Confucian in the office and a Taoist in the garden. Confucian when dealing with social obligations, Taoist when seeking personal peace. It's kind of like how modern people navigate work and home life, right? At work, professional, structured, following the rules, playing your role in the hierarchy. Very Confucian. At home, relaxed, authentic, just being yourself, very Taoist. The problem is when you can't switch between them, when you're so Confucian that you can't relax even at home, or so Taoist that you can't function in social structures at all. The wisdom is knowing when each approach is appropriate. So we've seen how Lao-zi's philosophy contrasted with Confucianism within Chinese culture. But Lao-zi's influence didn't stop there, because something remarkable happened when Taoism encountered another great philosophical tradition, one that came from India and would transform East Asian thought forever. I'm talking about Buddhism. And the synthesis that emerged from this meeting, it created something entirely new. Okay, this is where things get really fascinating from a historical and philosophical perspective. Look at this slide. Influence on Buddhism and Zen. And notice the subtitle. Lao-zi's philosophy profoundly influenced the development of Buddhism in China, creating a unique synthesis of wisdom traditions that continues to inspire millions. Think about what's happening here. Buddhism originated in India around the 5th century BCE with the teachings of the Buddha. It spread along the Silk Road and arrived in China around the 1st century CE. But when Buddhism arrived in China, it didn't just replace existing Chinese thought. It merged with it, particularly with Taoism. And that fusion created something entirely new, something that would eventually become Chan Buddhism in China and Zen Buddhism in Japan. This is one of the great examples of philosophical cross-pollination in human history. Let's look at the first point. Wu Wei and emptiness. Lao-zi's concept of Wu Wei finds deep resonance with Buddhist teachings on sunyata, emptiness, and the practice of non-attachment to outcomes. Now, this requires some careful thinking. Wu Wei and sunyata aren't identical concepts. They come from different philosophical frameworks, but there's a deep affinity between them. Remember Wu Wei? Effortless action, doing without forcing, acting in harmony with the natural flow, rather than imposing your will. Now consider the Buddhist concept of sunyata, emptiness. This doesn't mean nothingness in the Western sense. It means that things don't have fixed, independent, permanent essences. Everything is interdependent, constantly changing, empty of inherent existence. Here's where they connect beautifully. If things are empty of fixed essence, if everything is constantly changing and interdependent, then trying to force outcomes is futile. You're trying to impose your will on a reality that's fundamentally fluid and interconnected. Wu Wei makes sense in a world of emptiness. Don't cling to fixed outcomes. Don't force things to be what you want them to be. Flow with the changing nature of reality. And the Buddhist practice of non-attachment to outcomes? That's essentially Wu Wei applied to your mental states. Don't cling to results. Don't force your desires onto reality. Act skillfully, but let go of attachment to specific outcomes. Look at the second point. Birth of Chan Zen. Zen Buddhism, Chan in China, emerged as a beautiful integration of Taoist spontaneity, simplicity, and Buddhist meditation practices. This is historically and philosophically significant. Chan Zen isn't just Buddhism with Chinese characteristics. It's a genuine synthesis, something new that emerged from the meeting of two traditions. From Taoism, Chan Zen took emphasis on spontaneity and naturalness, distrust of excessive conceptualization and verbal teaching, value placed on simplicity and directness, harmony with nature. From Buddhism, Chan Zen took meditation practice, dhyana in Sanskrit, Chan in Chinese, Zen in Japanese, the goal of enlightenment, awakening, the framework of suffering and liberation. Monastic discipline and structure. And what emerged? Something distinctive. Think about Zen koans. Those paradoxical questions like, what is the sound of one hand clapping? That's very Taoist. It's trying to break you out of conceptual thinking, to point you toward direct experience that can't be captured in words, just like Lao-zi saying, the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. Or think about Zen aesthetics, the emphasis on simplicity, naturalness, imperfection, a tea ceremony, a rock garden, calligraphy. That's Taoist influence. Not ornate and elaborate, but simple and natural. Or the Zen emphasis on just sitting, zazen, meditation, without striving for enlightenment, without trying to achieve anything. That's Wu Wei applied to spiritual practice. You're meditating, but you're not forcing anything. You're just sitting, just being. Although I have to say there's something deliciously paradoxical about this. Don't try to achieve enlightenment. Just sit naturally without striving. Okay, I'll try really hard not to try. No, you're trying to not try. Stop that. Okay, I'll stop trying to try not to try. Now you're trying to stop trying to try not to try. It's like that old instruction. Don't think about a pink elephant. What's the first thing you think about? Pink elephant. But that's kind of the point. You can't think your way to Wu Wei or enlightenment. You have to let go of the trying itself, which is why these traditions use meditation, koans, and other practices to exhaust the conceptual mind. Look at the third point. Harmony with nature. Both traditions promote living in harmony with nature's rhythms and cultivating inner peace through acceptance and presence. This is where the synthesis becomes most visible. Both Taoism and Buddhism emphasize acceptance of what is, not fighting against reality, but understanding it deeply and working with it. Presence. Being fully in the present moment rather than lost in thoughts about past or future. Natural rhythms. Living in accordance with the seasons, the cycles of nature, the flow of life and death. Inner cultivation. The real work isn't changing the external world. It's transforming your own mind and heart. But here's what makes this synthesis so powerful. It's not just theoretical. It's lived. Think about a Zen monastery. The daily schedule follows natural rhythms, waking with the sun, meals at regular times, work in the gardens, meditation, sleep. Very Taoist. The meditation practice itself, sitting in silence, observing the breath, letting thoughts come and go without attachment. That's Buddhist technique infused with Taoist naturalness. The aesthetic, simple buildings, rock gardens, minimal decoration. Everything pointing toward naturalness and simplicity. Taoist influence. The goal, awakening, seeing your true nature, liberation from suffering. Buddhist framework, it's a complete integration. You can't separate the Taoist elements from the Buddhist elements because they've become one thing. What's philosophically interesting is that this synthesis resolved certain tensions. Buddhism, especially in its Indian forms, could be quite philosophical, quite conceptual. Lots of analysis of consciousness, elaborate metaphysics, complex doctrines. Taoism said, all that conceptualizing is getting in the way. The Tao can't be captured in concepts. Stop thinking so much and just be. Chan Zen took the Buddhist goal, enlightenment, liberation, but approached it with Taoist methods: spontaneity, directness, naturalness, minimal conceptualization. The result? A form of Buddhism that's immediate, practical, and experiential, rather than primarily philosophical and doctrinal. And here's the beautiful thing: this isn't just history. This synthesis is alive today. Zen Buddhism is practiced worldwide. People sit in meditation, study koans, practice mindfulness, create Zen gardens, perform tea ceremonies. The influence of Lao-zi's philosophy, filtered through this Buddhist synthesis, is shaping lives right now. When someone talks about being in the flow or living in the present moment, or letting go of attachment, they're drawing on this tradition, whether they know it or not. When someone practices mindfulness meditation, they're participating in a lineage that goes back through Zen, through Chan, through the meeting of Buddhism and Taoism, back to Lao-zi riding his water buffalo into the wilderness. And once again we have that beautiful irony. Lao-zi was leaving civilization, abandoning society, rejecting the whole project of organized religion and philosophy. And yet his ideas merged with Buddhism to create one of the most influential spiritual traditions in human history, with monasteries, hierarchies, rules, practices, and millions of followers. The guy who said, "The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao," spawned thousands of books, lectures, and teachings about the Tao. The philosophy of simplicity became the subject of complex scholarly analysis. The teaching of spontaneity became a structured practice with rules and techniques. I think Lao-zi would find this both frustrating and hilarious. So we've seen how Lao-zi's philosophy contrasted with Confucianism and merged with Buddhism. But what about his broader legacy? How has his influence rippled through history and into our modern world? That's what we're going to explore next. The enduring legacy of this mysterious sage who tried to disappear but ended up becoming immortal. Alright, look at this slide. Lao-zi's enduring legacy. And what we're seeing here is a timeline, a progression from ancient wisdom to modern global influence. Think about this. A man who may or may not have existed, who wrote 5,000 characters and then disappeared, has influenced human civilization for 2,500 years and counting. That's not just impressive, that's extraordinary. Let's walk through this timeline and see just how far-reaching his influence has been. Point 1. 6th century BCE. The Tao Te Ching becomes foundational text of Eastern philosophy. We're starting here, at the source. The 6th century BCE was an incredible time for human thought. What the philosopher Karl Jaspers called the Axial Age. Around the same time you had Lao-zi and Confucius in China, the Buddha in India, the Hebrew prophets in the Middle East, the pre-Socratic philosophers in Greece. It's as if humanity simultaneously, in different parts of the world, started asking deeper questions about existence, ethics, and the nature of reality. And in China, the Tao Te Ching became one of the foundational answers to those questions. Not the answer, remember, it coexisted with Confucianism and later Buddhism, but a foundational text that would shape Chinese thought for millennia. Point 2. Shapes development of Buddhism, Confucianism, and traditional Chinese medicine. Now, we've already talked about Buddhism, how Taoism merged with it to create Chan Zen. But notice what else is on this list. It shaped Confucianism too. Wait, didn't we just say they were opposites? Yes, but opposites influence each other. Later, Confucian thinkers, particularly the Neo-Confucians, incorporated Taoist concepts. They started talking about qi, vital energy, about harmony with nature, about the importance of inner cultivation alongside social duty. The two traditions didn't merge, but they influenced each other, creating a richer philosophical landscape. And traditional Chinese medicine, deeply Taoist, the concept of qi flowing through the body, the emphasis on balance, yin and yang, the idea that health comes from harmony with natural rhythms, the preference for gentle, natural interventions over forceful ones. All of this is rooted in Taoist philosophy. Point 3. Quoted by figures like Ronald Reagan and Dmitry Medvedev for wisdom on governance. Okay, this one is wild. Ronald Reagan, conservative American president, champion of capitalism and military strength, quoting Lao-zi. Dmitry Medvedev, Russian president, operating in a very different political context, also quoting Lao-zi. What's happening here? Why are modern political leaders, operating in systems Lao-zi would have found utterly alien, drawing on his wisdom? Because, and here's the thing, Lao-zi's insights about leadership are genuinely profound. The idea that the best leaders lead without forcing, that they create conditions for success rather than micromanaging, that they govern with a light touch rather than heavy-handed control. Now, whether Reagan and Medvedev actually practiced these principles is another question, but the fact that they felt compelled to quote Lao-zi shows the enduring appeal of his ideas about power and governance. Although we should note the irony here. Lao-zi's actual political philosophy was pretty radical. He basically said the best government is the one that governs least, that laws and regulations create more problems than they solve, that society was better off with minimal state intervention. In the Tao Te Ching, he writes things like, "The more laws and restrictions there are, the poorer people become." And, "Governing a large country is like cooking a small fish. You mustn't overdo it." So when modern politicians quote Lao-zi, they're often cherry-picking the parts that sound good while ignoring the more radical implications of his philosophy. They like the wisdom about gentle leadership, but they're not about to dismantle their governments and return to agrarian simplicity. Point 4 inspires modern spiritual, ecological, wellness, and mindfulness movements worldwide. And here's where we see Lao-zi's influence exploding in our contemporary world. Spiritual movements. People seeking alternatives to organized religion are drawn to Taoism's emphasis on direct experience over doctrine, naturalness over ritual. Ecological movements. Lao-zi's emphasis on harmony with nature, on humans as part of the natural world, rather than masters of it, resonates deeply with environmental consciousness. Deep ecology, eco-philosophy, these movements often cite Taoist principles. Wellness movements. The emphasis on balance, on gentle rather than forceful approaches, on working with the body's natural rhythms. This is everywhere in modern wellness culture. Yoga, Tai Chi, mindfulness practices, holistic health approaches. Mindfulness movements. The practice of present moment awareness, of non-striving, of accepting what is. These are deeply Taoist principles, filtered through Buddhist meditation practices. But here's the question. Why is Lao-zi so relevant now? Why is a 2,500-year-old philosophy experiencing a revival in the 21st century? Look at what the slide says at the bottom. Taoism remains a vital living philosophy, advocating for harmony with nature, balance with ourselves, and peace in our communities. I think Lao-zi speaks to our current moment because we're experiencing the consequences of the opposite approach. We've tried. Dominating nature rather than living in harmony with it, result climate crisis. Constant striving and optimization rather than balance, result burnout epidemic. Individualistic competition rather than community peace, result social fragmentation. Lao-zi offers an alternative vision. Not a return to some romanticized past, but a different way of thinking about progress, success, and the good life. Think about the environmental crisis specifically. For centuries, Western civilization operated on the assumption that nature was something to be conquered, controlled, dominated. Resources to be extracted. Wilderness to be tamed. Lao-zi said 2,500 years ago, "You're doing it wrong. Nature isn't something to dominate. It's something to understand and work with. The soft overcomes the hard. Water doesn't conquer the mountain by force. It flows around it, seeps into it, gradually shapes it." That's not just poetic language. That's practical wisdom about how to live sustainably on this planet. When modern environmentalists talk about working with nature, rather than against it, about biomimicry, about regenerative rather than extractive systems, they're echoing Taoist principles, whether they realize it or not. Now, I do have to point out the irony of Lao-zi inspiring the modern wellness industry. You can now buy Tao Te Ching coffee mugs, $24.99. Live Simply t-shirts made in factories, $35. Mindfulness apps with premium subscriptions, $12.99 a month. Luxury meditation retreats, $3,000 for a weekend of simplicity. Lao-zi, who advocated for reducing material desires and living simply, has become a marketing tool for selling stuff. Embrace Wu Wei, buy our $89 yoga pants. I'm pretty sure that's not what he had in mind. But beneath the commercialization, there's something genuine happening. People really are seeking more sustainable ways of living, better work-life balance, deeper connection with nature, inner peace in a chaotic world, meaning beyond material success, and Lao-zi's philosophy offers genuine wisdom for these seekers. Not easy answers, not quick fixes, but a fundamentally different way of thinking about what matters and how to live. So we've traced Lao-zi's influence from ancient China to the modern global world, from a foundational text of Eastern philosophy to inspiration for contemporary movements. But here's the real question. So what? What does this mean for you? How do you actually live according to these principles in the 21st century? That's what we're going to explore in our final section. All right, here we are. The final slide. Embracing the way today. And look at what it says. Lao-zi invites us to flow with life's natural rhythms, practicing humility, simplicity, and mindful awareness. Notice that word, invites, not commands, not demands, not, you must do this or you're doing it wrong. Invites. That's very Taoist. The philosophy doesn't impose itself. It offers a way and you're free to explore it or not. But if you do choose to explore it, what does that actually look like in our fast-paced, hyper-connected modern world? The slide gives us 3 concrete practices. Let's take them seriously and think about what they actually mean. Practice 1. Let go of forcing and controlling. Embrace Wu Wei by allowing life to unfold naturally, responding with flexibility rather than rigid resistance. Now this is hard. Really hard. Because our entire culture teaches us the opposite. We're taught to set goals and pursue them relentlessly, control outcomes through planning and effort, never give up, never surrender, push through obstacles with sheer willpower. And Lao-zi says, sometimes that's exactly the wrong approach. Think about a concrete example. You're in a difficult conversation with someone. You have a point you want to make. You know you're right. The forcing approach. Keep arguing. Push harder. Repeat your point louder. Refuse to back down until they admit you're right. The Wu Wei approach. Listen. Really listen. Be open to the possibility that you might be missing something. Respond to what they're actually saying rather than just waiting for your turn to talk. Let the conversation flow naturally rather than trying to force it to your predetermined conclusion. Which approach is more likely to actually resolve the conflict? Which one is more likely to maintain the relationship? Responding with flexibility rather than rigid resistance. This is crucial for our time. The world is changing faster than ever. Technology, climate, economy, society, everything is in flux. Rigid resistance to change is a recipe for suffering. Not because change is always good. Some changes are terrible and should be opposed. But because rigid resistance means you break when the pressure becomes too great. Flexibility means you can adapt. You can bend without breaking. You can respond to new circumstances without losing your core values. It's like that bamboo metaphor we talked about earlier. The bamboo bends in the storm. The rigid oak tree snaps. Practice 2. Find strength in gentleness. Remember that water's softness overcomes stone's hardness. True power lies in adaptability and patience. We've talked about this principle throughout the lecture, but now we're asking, how do you actually practice this? Here's what it means concretely. In conflict, gentleness means you don't escalate. You don't meet aggression with aggression. You stay calm, stay centered, respond thoughtfully, rather than react emotionally. That's not weakness. That takes tremendous strength. It's much easier to lash out, to match force with force. It's much harder to remain gentle when someone is being aggressive toward you. In pursuing goals, patience means you understand that meaningful change takes time. You don't force quick results. You plant seeds and nurture them. You trust the process. Again, that's not passivity. That's wisdom. The person who tries to force a tree to grow faster by pulling on it is a fool. The person who plants, waters, and waits is wise. Although, let's be honest, patience is really hard in our instant gratification culture. We are used to 2-day shipping, 1 day if you pay extra, instant streaming of any movie or show, immediate answers to any question via Google, real-time communication with anyone, anywhere. And then Lao-zi comes along and says, be patient, let things unfold naturally, good things take time. And we're like, but I want enlightenment now. Can I get it with Amazon Prime? Sorry, enlightenment takes 2,500 years of practice. No express shipping available. Practice 3. Walk the path with presence. And here we get that famous quote. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Walk the Tao with mindful ease. This is beautiful because it addresses 2 common mistakes. Mistake 1. Being so focused on the destination that you miss the journey. I'll be happy when I get the promotion, lose the weight, find the relationship, achieve the goal. Lao-zi says, the journey is the destination. Be present for each step. Find the Tao in the walking itself, not just in arriving. Mistake 2. Being so overwhelmed by the enormity of the journey that you never start. 1,000 miles? That's impossible. I'll never make it, Lao-zi says. Don't think about the 1,000 miles. Just take the first step, then the next one, then the next one. The journey happens one step at a time. Notice that phrase, mindful ease. Not mindful effort, not mindful striving. Mindful ease. This is the integration of everything we've learned. Wu Wei, effortless action. Softness overcoming hardness, balance and simplicity, present moment awareness. You're walking the path mindfully, you're paying attention, you're present, you're aware, but you're doing it with ease. You're not forcing, not straining, not making it harder than it needs to be. Look at what the slide says in that opening paragraph. In our fast-paced, hyper-connected world, his teachings offer timeless guidance for finding balance, cultivating inner peace, and living authentically. This is why Lao-zi matters now, not as a historical curiosity, not as ancient wisdom to be preserved in museums, but as a living philosophy that addresses our contemporary challenges. Fast-paced world? Lao-zi teaches slowness, patience, natural rhythms. Hyper-connected? Lao-zi teaches simplicity, reducing excess, finding stillness. Lack of balance? Lao-zi teaches the middle way, avoiding extremes. Inner turmoil? Lao-zi teaches peace through acceptance and harmony with the Tao. Inauthenticity? Lao-zi teaches naturalness, spontaneity, being true to your nature. But I want to be honest with you about something. This is not easy. Living according to Taoist principles in our modern world means swimming against powerful currents. The culture of constant productivity, the pressure to optimize every aspect of life. The social media comparison trap, the consumer economy that depends on your dissatisfaction, the political polarization that demands rigid positions. Choosing Wu Wei, simplicity, balance, gentleness, these are countercultural choices. They require courage. But here's what Lao-zi promises. If you can do it, if you can align yourself with the Tao, if you can practice Wu Wei, embrace softness, find balance, live simply, you'll discover something remarkable. Not success in the conventional sense, not wealth, fame, or power, but genuine fulfillment, inner peace, harmony with yourself, with others, with nature, the kind of deep satisfaction that doesn't depend on external circumstances. You'll find what Lao-zi found, the Tao, the way, the natural flow of existence that was there all along, waiting for you to stop forcing and start flowing. And here's the ultimate irony. After this entire lecture about the Tao, about Wu Wei, about how the Tao can't be spoken and must be experienced directly, you still don't know the Tao. Not really. Not from listening to me talk about it. Because remember the very first thing Lao-zi said? The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. I've been speaking about the Tao for the last hour, which means by definition I haven't been teaching you the real Tao. Just pointing at it, just giving you concepts and metaphors and examples. The real Tao, you have to experience it yourself. You have to walk the path. You have to practice Wu Wei. You have to find your own balance. So this lecture isn't really an ending. It's a beginning. I've given you the map. But the map isn't the territory. I've pointed at the moon. But the finger isn't the moon. Now you have to walk the path yourself. Take that first step. And then the next one. And then the next one. Not with grim determination, not with forced effort, but with mindful ease. Let go of forcing and controlling. Find strength in gentleness. Walk the path with presence. Lao-zi rode off into the wilderness 2,500 years ago, leaving behind 5,000 characters of wisdom. Those characters have traveled through time, across cultures, into languages he never knew existed, reaching people he could never have imagined. And now they've reached you. What you do with them is up to you. The Tao invites, but doesn't compel. It offers, but doesn't impose. The path is there. The first step is waiting. Will you take it?